Okay, so we're good to go. Welcome everybody to the second session in the Learning for Lawyers Redefined series. Thanks so much for joining us again. I'm really excited to bring you today our second session, and today we're covering enhancing employability, covering CVs, cover letters, applications, and interviews. This session will cover practical tips and advice on all of those areas, hopefully. And we have a mix of practitioners on the panel today, and all at different levels, which I'm hoping will be really useful for all of you who might be considering different routes. We've tried to devise the session in a way that it's relevant for those that are aiming for careers, both the solicitor route and the barrister route, and much of the advice applies across both of those routes because obviously both require CVs, applications, interviews, and the like. So I'm going to just introduce the people that I'm really pleased to have with me on the session today. And the first person is Sushil Kumar, who is a barrister at 25 Bedford Row. He specialises in serious and complex fraud. His other areas of expertise include defending motoring prosecutions for insurers and high net worth individuals, as well as representing mentally disordered clients in general crime. He also sits as a judge in the Mental Health Tribunal. We've also got Naomi Solomon, who is a clinical negligence solicitor. I think that might be Naomi's. Just going to mute that. Yeah. We've also got Naomi, sorry, who I've just had to mute, who's a clinical negligence solicitor who works within a dedicated team of lawyers, obtaining compensation for individuals who have suffered negligent treatment in a medical or clinical setting. She's experienced in a range of clinical negligence claims, most notably claims involving psychiatric harm, negligent or unnecessary surgery, fatal claims, and delay in diagnosis or treatment of various conditions, including, I can't even say that word, Naomi, so I'm not even going to try, but it also includes cancer, and I'm sure she'll tell you a bit more about her practice in due course. We've also got Aksa Hussain, who is a pupil barrister at No. 5 Chambers. She specialises in criminal and public law, and prior to the career at the bar, Aksa gained experience in strategy consulting, human rights work, cybersecurity, and international development. She's also the founder, and I'm adding this on to her bio that she sent me, to a really fantastic new initiative called the Human Rights Pulse, which I'm sure she'll tell you a little bit more about that as well when she speaks. And lastly, obviously myself, whom I think you all already know. I'm a barrister at 25 Bedford Row, backgrounds in criminal defence, now specialise in public inquiries. I'm very passionate about doing social mobility projects, working with young people and doing stuff like this. So really pleased to be here and to have everybody join me today. The suggested order was going to be to deal with CVs first, and that presentation, which is Naomi's. I'm just going to unmute Naomi and see if that or ask Naomi to unmute herself actually, because it looks like I can't unmute her, to see if her sound is a little bit better. And if not, what I might do is, as I said, ask Aksa to jump in whilst Naomi's sorting out her sound. I think I might do that, if that's okay with you, Aksa. Yeah, I'm just going to pull up your presentation, so just give me 1 second. Do you want to just give a really quick introduction about who you are, what you do, a bit more about Human Rights Pulse, whilst I pull up your slides?
Yeah, will do. I just skimmed through the list of people, and it's nice to see some familiar names who have already reached out, and I've seen at open evenings and such. So that's really nice to see you guys attending this sort of virtual presentation. As Zeenat mentioned, my name is Aksa Hussain. I am a Second Six pupil barrister. I started Second Six a month ago, and as you can imagine, specialising in crime, haven't had much use of my wig and gown yet, or really been in court at all. So for the most part, I've been focusing on pro bono stuff, and one of the projects that I'm really passionate about at the moment is my Human Rights Pulse project, which Zeenat also mentioned. The aim is to essentially make international human rights law an accessible and engaging topic that people can, talk about. Often there are lots of gateways to be able to enter the discourse of human rights, and my idea was essentially to just take that away, and if you've got something good to say, you can write, informed, insightful articles, then they can be published on the platform. So that was the idea. It's doing really well so far. We've had so many writers. I think a few of you on the list are also involved in different capacities, so that's really nice to see. So if you're interested in writing, get involved. I know Zena and the others also have really excellent projects that they do on the side as well, so looking forward to hearing about them as well.
Brill, thanks so much. I'm hoping that everybody can see your slides. Can somebody confirm that you can see them? Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Brill. Thank you. So if you just let me know when you want me to maneuver between the slides, and I'll do my best.
Perfect. So I am in charge of telling you guys about cover letters. I can tell you that I've written many, many, many cover letters. Zenat mentioned I had a bunch of things that I did before the bar. And as you can imagine, going into any of those professions, it's lots and lots of cover letters. So lots of rejections, lots of cover letters, lots of trial and error. So I feel like I've got a good grasp on what you need to put in, what you shouldn't put in. And hopefully this presentation encompasses that well for you. So if you go on to the first slide.
Yeah.
So that is the aim of a cover letter. And I think, so obviously this presentation was going to come after Naomi's, which was going to be about the CV. But the biggest lesson, or the biggest message I can give to you is not to repeat your CV and to make sure you're complementing it. The last thing you want to do is waste space in this one-page cover letter on just regurgitating what's already been said. And the aim that you really need to think about is how your advocacy is going to come across, how your written communication skills are going to come across. Those are probably the most important aspects to keep in mind when you are writing your cover letter. When a reader reads your cover letter, the first thing they're going to think is this person deserving of the role? Is this person worthy of a vacation scheme or a mini pupillage, or an actual pupillage or a training contract? And obviously things that I'll come to later, but are pretty obvious. If there are glaring punctuation errors or just bad grammar, syntax, etc., that's a big no-no from the get-go. So the aim of the covering letter is really to make sure that you are giving the reader a good indication about how you can advocate, persuade, in a written manner, and what more you can add on beyond your CV. If you go on to the next slide, Zenat.
Yeah.
So this is a bit of a template that I've come up with, stealing from lots of different websites, talks, all sorts of things that I attended prior to getting pupillage. And I think it's, I also spoke to quite a few people, both working in HR, in kind of the legal sector and other sectors, to figure out what makes a good cover letter. Because they are important. So as you can see, it's pretty straightforward. And this is the sort of general structure you want to follow, ensuring that it is no longer than one page. A short introduction that's, pretty clear what stage you're at. So for me, it was something along the lines of, I'm a GDL student. I am, could you make the slides bigger, Zena?
Yeah, is that any bigger, guys? My laptop seems to be, is that any bigger? AXA?
I can't really see. I'm using my own slides because I can't see the comments and at the same time. So everyone says it's bigger, so that's good.
Okay, fine. I mean, I can't see any of your faces, but I'm going to keep it like this.
Great. So, and please tell me if I'm speaking too fast. Right, so to continue, short introduction, what stage you're at in your studies and what you're applying for. I have often gone through CVs and cover letters myself, actually most recently for the recruiting people for Human Rights Pulse, and just having a look at people not even bothering to give this basic introduction, I just automatically didn't want to read the rest of their cover letter. So it's such a small thing, but it's really important to do. You need to go into what areas of law you're interested in and why, and make sure you are applying to chambers that are, offer those areas of specialty. And then there are two main things that you need to cover, which, as I've written here, why you and why then. In terms of why you, again, it's not just simply regurgitating your CV. It is really going into evidence of why you are, why you would be suitable for a mini pupillage or a training contract, whatever, at this place. So showing the relevant experience and key achievements and how you got there is really important. I've put in here, as you guys can see, something called context action result or situation task action result. These are two sort of frameworks that HR people throw around. They're called the CAR or the STAR method, which are just good frameworks that if you're not sure how to structure one of your experiences, you could use them, and they generally make sure you bring out all the important points that an employer would want to read about. So keep those in mind when you do write this why you section, and make sure you relate it to skills that are relevant to being a barrister or a solicitor. Why then? Make sure you research the chambers, the particular chambers, get the name right. First of all, that's really, really important, and something that we all think, oh yeah, of course we're good enough to do that. But the number of copy and paste cover letters I've sent and been very embarrassed about in hindsight, it happens to all of us. So just double check. Things such as being able to comment on the size of chambers, their locations that they offer, the different specialties they offer. These are all important things that you should be able to bring into your cover letter as well to show why you're interested. Also do look into the work that their juniors do, because that's typically the sort of work that you would be doing. And feel free to comment on that as well, because obviously in a cover letter they're seeing whether you can engage with the organisation. As a conclusion, always state your availability, even though it might fall outside of the time frame that Chambers has allocated or firms have allocated for work experience. Sometimes they are flexible, so if you state your availability and they like your cover letter, they will generally be inclined, in my experience at least, to give you the benefit of the doubt and to move dates around. And a final line, always reasserting your commitment to the profession. That's quite important, I think. Finally, always end with something formal. Yours sincerely, yours faithfully, kind regards, best regards, whatever, something like that. Not just I'm really committed to being a barrister, thanks, look forward to hearing from you, AXA. No, don't do that. End formally. Make sure you have your address headers as well. That some organizations don't really care about that because we don't post cover letters anymore, but some organizations do. So just in general, the sort of rule is just, make sure that you do put addresses down. If you go to the next slide, Dina. So this is what not to include. As I've already said, don't waste time repeating your CV. Incorrect name of the chambers and firm, address, the person who you're meant to address it to. Often all these websites will have, the relevant websites will have, address it to Mr. John Smith, etc. Now, don't just say dear sir or madam when you have to address it to Mr. Smith. So, those sort of particularities are quite important. Don't mention all the other work experience mini pupillages that you've done. Say, I've done 6 others and this, would be a great 7th addition to my portfolio of work experience. Yeah, I wouldn't want to give you work experience. I'd want to give it to somebody else. So be careful how you tread that line. Again, that would be repeating your CV. So, don't put it on. Don't include hyperlinks. Often, at least in my experience, CVs, cover letters are often printed out and given to people to have a look at. They could also be sent via email. You just don't know, so don't put hyperlinks in. It's just unnecessary underlines that will come out in print, if that happens. Don't put in random punctuation. The other day I was looking at a CV and it almost read as, in English, during your English GCSE, when you get extra marks in semicolons and hyphens and all these other random punctuation marks, you don't get any of those random points in a cover letter. Keep it simple. Don't try to be extravagant using all sorts of things. Don't use exclamation marks. I've seen that a lot as well. That just does not work. So yeah, keep it simple and appropriate. Try not to name drop. I know that's always if somebody directly told you you've done work with them and there's a reason for you to mention a name, do so. But otherwise, there's no need to say, oh, and I think the work of list and duties just doesn't add anything to your cover letter. And finally, my pet peeve is definitely when people say, oh, you're a really great organisation or chambers, that's why I want to apply here for a mini. Yeah, they know that. You don't need to tell them. Next slide, please. The format, that's pretty straightforward. 1 page max. Generally, it's never over that. 12 easy to read fonts. Stick to the standard fonts. Don't do something like Comic Sans. It just does not look professional, sadly. Also, no fancy borders, formatting. Please proofread your cover letter. Again, this is such an indication of what sort of written advocacy you have. So it's very important that there aren't mistakes, and often they're so easily avoidable if you do read your cover letter out loud. And don't use contractions. My presentation is full of contractions, but I am not. This is not a cover letter, so where it's do not, don't write, don't, etc. It's such a small thing, but it's a bit unprofessional to use them. At least that's what I've been told, so I don't do it. I thought it would be quite funny in a way to show you some of the terrible mistakes that I made during my early days of applying for mini pupilages. So if you go to the next slide, you can see that this is one of them. I found this paragraph the other day I was looking. It says, during the GDL, I've developed a keen interest in criminal law, public law, competition law, international law, property law, and technology law, and have been exploring these in my spare time. I hope that a mini pupillage at Chambers will allow me to learn more about the practice in, I don't know, whatever area of law, as well as provide me with insights into a barrister's day-to-day working life. That is terrible. These are 1,000 areas of law that are just not compatible with each other. And clearly I'm not exploring all of these in my spare time. And sure, I might have gained an interest in them during the GDL, but I can't, reasonably say that I'm interested in all of these and I want to apply to a specialist criminal set to just learn about crime. So be specific and be sensible. The next slide. I wrote something along the lines of, through these types of experiences, I have developed my advocacy, written and oral presentation, personal resilience, leadership, and time management skills, all of which I believe to be essential to a successful barrister. Again, a terrible, a faux pas. Don't do it. These, you're not going to learn the 1,000 things from one experience, or maybe you are, and then you've just got to elaborate it better. Again, when I was looking through very old cover letters to find some examples, I saw this and I was just face palming the whole time. So yeah, be mindful of what is practical that you could learn, and not just throwing every key word that you think is good in there. And finally, the final slide, I wrote in a cover letter, and I think this was in one of the starting paragraphs, I may be an odd choice of candidate. And then in the second paragraph, it was, although I lack any experience. And it's just, starting on negatives. And again, these cover letters didn't get me anywhere. But it's a learning process, and I wish somebody told me all the don't do's back then, and I would have maybe taken them into account. But don't start on negatives. It just doesn't give a great impression. Try to be quite positive and affirmative in the way that you write. And I think that would lead to a good cover letter in the end. Does anyone have any questions about that, or should we save those till later?
That's brilliant. I think that's great. I think what would be good is if we save questions till the end. But what I thought would be really fab is if you don't mind, give a little bit of a insight into your personal journey to pupillage, just in about 5 minutes or so. If you don't mind sharing that, would that be all right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I came from a very, non-conventional background. I did my degree abroad. I was also in completely different fields, and it was literally just months before the GDL I decided I want to do law, started the GDL. I was like, I want to be a barrister, and I really had no contacts in the legal field whatsoever. So I approached it very pragmatically and thought, what do I need to do in order to even get on to, get an interview? So I literally wrote out a list of all the things that it seemed that I had to do. Mini pupillages, marshalling, pro bono, mooting, and I think, writing, etc. So these were sort of the standard things I had to get on ticked off in order to even qualify, to get my foot in the door, so to speak. So I spent, I think, the best part of 5 months from starting the GDL, just working really hard to get all of those, plus work experience at a solicitor's firm, and just making sure I had enough to be sure that if I did get interviews, that I was able to say, I've tried both sides of the fence, and I'm very sure that I want to be a barrister, and I'm very sure I'm interested in crime, and I'm very sure, with the sorts of areas I want and I don't want, etc. It was a very sort of whirlwind journey. And, what I will say is I was definitely, I worked hard for sure, but there is definitely an element of luck involved, because I know people who work so hard and are a few years in and still not getting pupillage. It really is a numbers game and a luck game at the end of the day, I think. And, I was very lucky to get pupillage the first time round. And that was also, after getting 8 first round interviews or something, and 2 second rounds, and then 1 reserve offer. And then that reserve offer, the person who was offered it didn't get it. And then I got pupillage. So really, as you can see, and I'm very open about that, it is a luck game in that sense. Obviously, you need a certain amount of credentials to get into the door. But after that, your behest to the panel, to the people that read your applications, to the people you do assess mini pupillages with, and you just really, you don't know. So all you can do is do your best to make sure you have that checklist. And I think for people who come from those sort of non-conventional backgrounds, who don't necessarily have the contacts, I sent out, I think, maybe 50 plus mini pupillage cover letter / applications before I had even 1 response, which was, we'll put you on the wait list for, mini pupillage in a couple of months. And I just kept, knocking on doors, metaphorically speaking. And eventually I got one, and then the ball just started rolling. Same with mooting. I wasn't getting very far. I had no formal advocacy experience, but I just kept trying. I mean, I did an IP moot. I don't even, do IP. But, I just got involved in, I just got involved in everything, because I just thought, at the end of the day, it's just experience. And, if I can write IP submissions, then I might be able to do crime. And, it was just very much like not paying attention to all the potential barriers and just going for it. And I think that says a lot also about your personality when it does come to the interview phase, because when they asked, how did your mooting go? I said, well, I've done 6 competitions, haven't won anything, but they were great experiences. And that was always a good chuckle for the panel. In terms of writing and just getting your name out there, so very early on I started writing for the Justice Gap, which is, you know, a magazine about law and justice. I also was just blogging around and, you know, writing for different platforms about justice issues, I guess. And now I've started this platform to also give Human Rights Pulse, to give students the chance to write content about human rights issues, but also at the same time get experts to write about these things to really, you know, add credibility to the platform. So I think just putting yourself out there, getting involved in whatever you can, because, you know, opportunities are limited as a student, particularly a student who doesn't have, you know, the BPTC or the or even a law degree yet. Opportunities are limited, so just taking whatever you can, grabbing onto it, and often universities are a good starting point because they offer so much. Yeah, and then I got pupillage, as I said, by, you know, complete luck, and here I am giving this presentation to you guys. So yeah.
Brill, that's so fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing that, AXA. Really great, really helpful. Just a reminder to anybody that might have some questions on the back of AXA's presentation or her journey to pupillage, please put them in the chat box, and we'll come to them at the end, providing we've still got enough time. Also, try and please write the questions as you go along, because what happened last week, for those of you who were on it, was that we just got like a whole heap of questions in one go. So it's just kind of helpful if we have them trickling in, if that's okay. I'm going to see if we've got Naomi on the call. I think we do, because I can see her name. Naomi, can you hear us okay now? I can see it as if she's there, and I can see that she's got 3 dots. No. What I might have to do is again skip over Naomi's bit, and then if we can't sort out the tech for her, we might have to try and attempt to cover her slides, AXA. I'm just going to wait for Naomi, if you are on the call and you can hear, just stick it in the chat and let me know. What I'm going to do, I think, just to keep the flow of this going, is jump onto my section on application forms, or I guess it doesn't really matter the order. Sushil, you're still there, aren't you? I can see you somewhere.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah, are you good to do your bit on pupillage interviews? Is that okay?
Yeah, of course. What I can do is I might have the camera working on my phone, so I'm going to try that.
Okay, no worries. Whilst you're doing that, I'm just going to pull up your slides to make sure that I've got them.
There's a question there. Do you want me to take it?
Yeah, do you want to go for it, AXA, whilst we're sorting out?
So somebody asked, does a personal profile add anything to the CV, or, like AXA said, should we just write a couple of lines in the cover letter? My personal opinion is, and particularly when I've had to work for organisations and go through CVs, I do not like personal profiles. I think personally they don't add anything. They're always very similar things, like, I am a really hard-working, motivated, you know, looking forward to a career at the so-and-so, etc. And that is all stuff that can easily go into your cover letter in the first, you know, paragraph, first couple of paragraphs, and it just does not need to waste space on your CV, which is really important to give the reader a glance of everything that you've done in your life up till that point. So that's my opinion. I think Naomi might feel a bit differently from when I glance through a slide, and everyone has different opinions. So ultimately it does come down to, if your personal profile is really good and you think, gosh, this is a stellar line that I just don't want to take out, keep it in. And if it's not, if you're a bit wishy-washy about it, just don't put it in, is my opinion.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, AXA. I can see Sushil in his shirt and tie. Did you get dressed up for this, Sush?
Badly, yes.
Oh, well, that's what happens when you've got a judge on the line, everybody. So really pleased that you're with us, Sushil. I'm just going to bring up your slides, and I'm sure everybody is really excited to hear from you. So just give us 1 sec. Also, just for some context for everybody else, Sushil and I are in chambers together, and we've both been on pupillage committee for about 4 or 5 years until this January just gone. We thought we'd done our kind of time on the committee. So our kind of approach is going to come from the fact that we've kind of been on pupillage committee for quite a long time. And also, as with most chambers, we all have to look at paper applications, which is very, very fun. So on that note, Sush, I'm going to pass over to you. Can everybody see Sushil's slides? And are they big enough? I don't know why this won't let me do a normal slideshow like a normal person. Maybe that will do it. Does that do it? Brill. Cool. Over to you, Sushil.
Right, okay, I'm sorry everyone for the very unflattering angle, but I don't think there is a flattering angle that I can show you. So you're just going to have to make do with what you see on the screen. Thanks very much to Zenat for inviting me to give some thoughts about interview techniques. And whatever Zenat will tell you and add is probably far more valuable than anything I can say. But having been on the pupillage committee for a while, there are some things which we have found candidates make the same errors over and over again. And there are certain things where successful candidates have very similar styles, not necessarily in what they say, how they speak, but what they actually deliver, what they bring to the table. So hopefully this should give you some kind of idea of what we're looking for and how you can better prepare yourself for that. So if we could go to the first slide after the cover slide, that's brilliant. Some chambers will give you, if you're in the fortunate position to have an interview, will give you some indication as to what's expected. There are often a number of interview processes that you'll have to go through: a first round, a second round, and in some cases in our chambers there was a third round as well. Importantly, when they do provide that information, it's really, really vital to read it. I know that sounds very trite, but the number of people who don't take full opportunity of preparing themselves before an interview, when the information is there before them, is quite surprising. And what I'm talking about essentially is some chambers will ask you to either create a presentation or they will ask you to undertake a legal exercise. Those are the two main things that you will probably come across when you're approaching an interview. If it's unclear as to what precisely they're asking, ask others to have a look for you. So friends, mentors, tutors, etc. If you're still unclear, if you need to, for example, bring anything in, if you need to prepare a slideshow, if you need to bring in notes, if you're allowed to bring in notes, as a last kind of resort, then I would certainly say email the set. They're not going to hold that against you, but make sure you try to work out what they're actually asking rather than just emailing them as your first resort. When they do ask you to prepare something, whether it be, as I said, a presentation or let's say a bail application or something of that nature, you should actually prepare. It's amazing how many people don't. So as we said, first of all, presentations. Second of all, one of the most common things that you'll be asked about is quite obviously your application. The reason why you need to go through it is there may be something of particular interest, not necessarily to you, but to the panel, which they will want to drill down in some detail about. Let's say, for example, as I work in a criminal set, I may have included some work experience that I put in my original application at a civil solicitor's. They may well ask you, well, you've had work experience at civil solicitors, why are you interested in applying to a criminal set? You may not have thought that was important because it didn't directly relate to your ambitions in the criminal sphere, but certainly it's not something that you can preclude being asked about. So certainly go through your application with a fine-tooth comb and be ready to answer any questions they may have about it, whether it's about anything you've put down legally, work experience, or indeed your hobbies. That's certainly an area of interest to us as interviewers. The third category, if we're looking at point 4, is current legal topics. Current legal topics should be self-evident. Obviously tailor them to the area that you're interested in, whether it's property, whether it's crime, whether it's civil, but also do have a general overview of issues that are ongoing as we speak. So let's say, for example, there's talk about whether or not we should have trials by judge alone. Certainly, if I was on an interview panel, I'm not this year. I was many years previously, and for many years I intend to be. I would ask certainly about judge-only trials. One of the things that you can do to try and show that you've got some knowledge about that is read a bit around it. There are a number of jurisdictions that do offer that opportunity. So let's say, for example, Jersey or New South Wales in Australia. Both of those give defendants the opportunity to waive their rights to trial by jury. And then you can go on to speak about the pros and the cons. But essentially what I'm saying is I'm commending some legal reading to you beforehand. And then lastly, in terms of actual preparation, questions to ask the interviewers if appropriate. As interviewers, we don't really welcome or encourage questions unless they are relevant or they will be a question that is important that we haven't perhaps answered either in the application information that we send out or indeed something that you may feel is particularly pressing. But I'm not suggesting that you ask questions, but do have a question to hand if you think it is important, if you are really pressed to ask one. But I don't think you will be. If we could go on to the next slide then. Thanks, Zena. Right, for the day, this covers both appearances in person and also remotely. I've tailored this a little bit. What you really need to think about is if you're not successful this time round, hopefully this crisis will pass, we'll no longer be living under the cloud of the pandemic, and we'll be face-to-face interviewing people. That's particularly important as I think it's easiest to get your own personality and your own abilities across face-to-face rather than over a video screen. So basic tips, and again, surprising at how many people we have had turn up late or say they've got lost or been delayed on public transport. Absolutely vital in terms of working out what you're doing and where you're going. So, for example, I had some issues Skyping in with a video image. That's something you need to have worked out beforehand, which I didn't. So do as I say, not as I do. Things like your camera working, battery being charged, updates, your computer being completed, making sure you're in a quiet place, your phone is on silent, so on and so forth. But what I want to focus on as well is appearances in person. The reason why that's important is, as I said, once this is over, there will be a number of things that you may not have to hand when you are at a set of chambers, which you can have to hand at your desk when you're Skyping in. So, for example, if, as I stated, they were going to ask you a question about the Bail Act, or they were going to ask you to present a plea in mitigation, the question you would ask yourselves is, well, can I bring any resources with me? Resources such as a computer, a tablet, a legal practitioner's text, something along those lines. I would always suggest that you do bring whatever you think you will need, bring it in a bag, keep it there, and certainly you should ask, am I allowed to use this? I brought X, Y, and Z with me. I brought Blackstone's with me. Can I use it? Either you'll be told, unfortunately not, or you'll be told, yes, you can. If you don't have one and you were allowed to use it, then you'll be kicking yourselves. And if you do have one, you're not allowed to use it, at least the people who are there will think, well, they've obviously taken initiative and brought it with them. It will also make you feel more comfortable generally. So I cannot overstress, and this is something that carries through to your practice as well, the importance of preparation, whether you're appearing at an interview or indeed a hearing. It's absolutely vital. Hopefully, I will go on to more directly applicable items for the interview. And so if we could go on to the next slide. Brilliant, thank you. The interview itself. So I've divided this into 3 slides. And the first of these is presentability. May sound slightly stupid and you may think unimportant, but the first appearance that you'll make is a visual appearance, and the impression that carries is significant. Most people, it's basic human psychology, most people come to a decision within the first approximately 5 to 10 seconds as to what kind of person they think they are opposite. So when we're talking about interviewing, presentability, we talk about what we're wearing, we're talking about essentially you acting as a shop front for your own business. So dress formally, again, and I keep on returning to this point, people turn up with very loud ties, with scuffed shoes, with shirts untucked on occasion. And those are all mistakes that are easily remediable, and they create a poor impression. The reason why it's so important is not because the profession itself is very staid and formal, although in some quarters it is. It's because the impression that you convey will be the same impression at interview as you will probably convey to your client when you meet them in court, or indeed a judge, or indeed a jury. And so it's absolutely vital that you present that. What goes glove in hand with presentability is confidence. Confidence is something that you can fake, and there's a again, you can fake it till you make it, which is quite apt in these circumstances. Confidence doesn't come naturally to people by large parts. So the way in which you can present yourself as a confident person is, in my view, relatively simple, and it's both physical and mental. One of the things that I was taught is, and I haven't been doing it necessarily to best effect here because we do have limited time, is to slow down. So slow down absolutely everything. Slow down your breathing, slow down your rate of speech, and slow down any kind of nervous tics that you have, whether it's tapping your feet, or whether it's fidgeting or fiddling with a pen. Just try and slow everything down. The moment you do that is the moment you'll find yourself gaining greater clarity in terms of how you can present yourself, respond in interview, and present the best side of you. So slow down. That's my ultimate advice, and that's what I say to our pupils in chambers as well when we're doing advocacy sessions. Measure and poise comes within that, and taking the measure of a room. When you slow down and you look around, you may be on a panel with 2 people opposite you or 5 people opposite you. It gives you the opportunity to look them each in the eye and create a lasting impression. And so these are all soft skills that you will have, hopefully developed over time, or can develop, that will put you in a good position when you come to interview. The flip side of slowing down is slowing down in itself is not enough. And what I would further suggest, very few things, and hopefully these will be of use, is the way in which you speak. I'm not talking about accents. Accents are to be welcomed and encouraged. They mark you out from coming from wherever you do come from, and they're not something as they used to be, a hindrance at the bar. So put that out of your mind. What I'm talking about is effectively diction. So how you use your words and phrases, and then how clearly you enunciate them. And those are the 2 key points when you are slowing down and you're talking to audiences that will carry over into the message that you bring to them. Anyone can do that. It takes a little bit of practice, and after a while it will become second nature to you. You may not necessarily speak like that normally in day-to-day life, but when you go into a professional environment, it's very easy to adopt those. You slip into a second skin, if you will, and it works, and it's effective, and it shows what kind of advocate you can be in court. If you hurry, if you rush, if you mumble, if you're nervous, that's not going to persuade anyone. This is the ultimate test of you selling yourself. So you really need to think carefully about what you say, how you say it, and how quickly you say it. And all of those things are things that you can practice at home. If we could go on to the next slide, Zina, that'd be lovely. Thank you. in interview itself, these are some basic rules as to how to approach the most common questions that you will be asked in interview. And I'll go through them one by one. And before I do so, the general rules for all of these questions are, first of all, listen to the question and respond to it. You may think again, trite, but when you're listening to questions being asked in an interview, it's often a case of candidates wanting to give the answer that they think they should give, rather than answering the question that the panel has asked. So listen to it carefully, make sure your full attention is directed towards the questioner. The second part is, if you didn't catch it the first time around, don't be afraid to say, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Would you mind repeating that? If you didn't understand it, ask or say so. Say, well, I'm afraid I'm not quite sure I follow. Would you mind explaining it in a different way? That will engender a great amount of respect from the panel, rather than you blundering in thinking, oh God, I've got to fake it, or I've got to say something to make it look like I'm not stupid, or I can answer a question. If you answer a different question, if you try and effectively blag it and come up with something that's wrong, you'll make yourself look stupid. Whereas if you essentially say, I'm sorry, please can you explain that again? You'll get respect for showing that you're open and upfront and that you want to properly engage. And also it reflects well on you, because there'll be opportunities and occasions in court where you're being interrupted by a judge, or a judge is deciding to interrupt you, and you will only be able to answer or placate the judge by answering his questions. And if you don't understand it the first time, as I've had to do on occasion, I've asked them to rephrase it or to ask a question again. And then lastly, beware verbiage, something I'm very guilty of, where 10 words will suffice. People use 100. So you just answer the question as succinctly as you can. Right, so those are the general rules. I'll move on to the specific ways in which you can answer the different types of question. If we begin with legal questions, they will most commonly be about, and forgive me once I turn over my notes, current affairs, topics, burning issues. Now, I've got two examples of questions, and you need to listen to what question is being asked and also how it's being asked. The panel may well ask you, if you're in the criminal sphere or civil sphere, and they will ask you a question about Ivy. Ivy is a case which relates to dishonesty. It's a Supreme Court case. You can find it on the Supreme Court website. And one of the questions may be, and listen to the difference in the two ways in which we'll ask this question. Should there be a single test for dishonesty across the criminal and civil sphere? That's question number one. Question number two, what has the effect of Ivy been on the criminal courts? The difference between the two questions, and they are different, is that the first question is more discursive. So it encourages you to go into a bit of background, pros and cons. Should there be a single test for dishonesty across criminal and civil spheres? So they're essentially inviting you to have a bit of a chat with them. The second question is more focused. What has the effect of Ivy been on the criminal courts? So they're not expecting you, as they may do in the first iteration of the question, to go into a full background, pros and cons, etc. What they really want is the immediate effect. So you could say, let's say, for example, the impact on trials that it would have, a narrowing of defences, introducing a level of unfairness and uncertainty in relation to stare decisis, because Ivy is in relation to a gambling case. It wasn't a criminal case. The criminal courts are now applying Ivy. Is that fair when there is no definitive Court of Appeal authority at present, or Supreme Court authority, as to if this test should be preferred rather than the old dishonesty test, which is gauche? We will find that out very shortly, but you need to listen to how they're asking the questions as well as what's being asked, so you can respond appropriately. If we can move on then to same slide, competency questions, and that's something that actually touched upon earlier. What they're asking there and what they want is, please could you tell us about a time where you displayed good judgment, or where you had to placate someone who was angry, or let's say, for example, when you worked under pressure. The way in which you answer those questions can either be with reference to either your personal life or your professional life. It doesn't really matter. What matters is the way in which you answer those questions, and it's absolutely vital. And this is as true for a job interview as for pupillage as it is when I did my interviews and exams to sit. What they are looking for is a structured response. So you think of a situation, you describe the situation. Let's say you worked in a shop, you had an angry customer. You explain, I worked in Sainsbury's at the age of 22 as a part-time job. The customer came in, he was absolutely furious. The manager wasn't there. I was the next most senior person to have to deal with it. Then you explain the task, what they were complaining about, why they were complaining, then the action, what you did, and the result. Everyone was happy, and you saved the company money or made the customer particularly delighted, so he spoke to your manager about it when he came back on the next occasion, etc. This is your opportunity to clearly structure an answer that shows you in the best light possible. Think of a number of answers that you could possibly provide, a number of examples from both your professional and personal life in relation to demonstrating good judgment, working under pressure, demonstrating or displaying being able to work in a team, or time management skills. All of those things are very important. So have a think about what the panel may ask you. It will all be to do with skills of the barrister, but just think of those examples in advance. And then if we could just move on to the last slide, Zina, that would be lovely. Fantastic, step ahead as always. The interview itself. When you're being asked questions and giving answers, or indeed if you're presenting a topic, there will quite often be intervention. That's the way that panels can see whether or not you will be able to stand up in court to an irate judge, or a judge that hasn't had breakfast and got out the wrong side of bed this morning. Listen to the intervention. Do not interrupt. Okay, so no matter how urgently or desperately you feel you need to get your message across, listen to the intervention. Then wait. Waiting not only shows that you've listened to it, waiting also provides you with some time to think about what your answer is going to be and how you're going to appropriately structure it. Then thirdly, you can answer, and I would suggest you answer in a respectful and measured way, but you can be forceful. The reason I say that is interventions may be for two reasons. They, and I talk about the panel here, may challenge you because they want to see how far they can push you and how willing you are to defend a particular position that you've adopted. Let's say you think the death penalty is a good idea. I'm sure no one here does, and I'm sincerely hoping for applying to a criminal set you don't suggest that. But let's say you're arguing it, or you've been asked to argue it. You can really stand your ground if you want to. You can be as forceful as you like, as long as it's respectful and polite. That's one of the ways in which, or one of the reasons why panels may interrupt, to see how far they can push you. The other reason they may interrupt is to see if you will back down from your position because you have made a demonstrable mistake. By that, I mean, you may have misinterpreted something. You may have, let's say, gone down a wrong route, and the panel is then giving you an opportunity to correct yourself, to resile from that position and say, well, actually, no, I was mistaken here. I would like to rethink that. If you think it's the latter, or if you realize it's the latter, in other words, you've made a mistake, do not double down. Do not think, oh Christ, I've got to die in this ditch. I've got to make sure that I argue my point to the end of the earth. The panel will respect you a lot more if you can concede that you may have made a mistake and that on reflection, this could be a different possible answer that you could give. That shows that you're able to think on your feet and you'd be able to be persuasive in court and also deal with any issues that come up apropos of nothing, which they can and often do in the criminal court, certainly. I know I've been quite a while now. I'll quickly go through the last parts of this final slide. Making a presentation, hopefully all of you will have had experience of doing this. Just essentially what I'm saying is give it a beginning, a middle and an end. You need to make sure that your listeners are carried through from beginning to end without losing them in between. So make it shorter rather than longer is my suggestion. And when you're presenting, we go back to what I suggested. First of all is tone, pace, emphasis, enunciation, clearly, slowly and compellingly. When you speak in a fast or slow way, or you change your modulation, you change your emphasis, you change your tone, all of those are very persuasive and powerful tricks or conceits that you can use to carry people with you in a story or with your arguments. That's quite important. Lastly, or penultimately, let's talk about yourself. If you are asked to talk about yourself and your hobbies and your passions, this is your opportunity to show who you really are. It's absolutely key that you take as much of this, as much an opportunity as you can to show who you are. And that essentially means not just regurgitating, oh, I'm really passionate about reading or traveling. Again, examples or particular reasons why they make you so passionate or you find such interest in them. I remember one of the applications that I read, particularly piqued my interest, and this was, I think, the year before last, was because one of the people who applied was a champion baker. I just thought that was absolutely incredibly interesting, and I wanted to know more about them. They obviously had a good CV otherwise, answered questions well, but that's what separated them from somebody else who said, I enjoy playing football on the weekend. I love football. I enjoy playing it as much as the next person. Passionate West Ham fan. However, that is not something that is going to separate you from the thousands of other people who also put down the same very, very normal, and I don't say that pejoratively, but very normal pursuits. So try and show who you are and how you're different. When I suggest, when you're talking about yourself, passion, sincerity and humour, this is your opportunity to judge the room. If there is the opportunity for humour, if the panel is being lighthearted, gauge the mood of the panel and engage with them. Obviously, don't go in there telling jokes, but you can read people. That's part of the skill of being a barrister. So make use of that if you can. And as I said, exit strategy, both in person and also by video. The way you want to exit, you don't need to ask questions. I can't impress that upon you enough. Do not need to ask questions. Merely say, thank you very much. I very much appreciate the time that you've given me. And I look forward to hearing from you soon. And then hang up. It's as simple as that. But make sure whoever has finished speaking has had the opportunity to say everything that they needed to. Indicate that you're going to leave unless there's anything further. And then hang up and you'll be fine. That is absolutely it. I've rattled through it. I've broken all the rules that I promised to myself that I wouldn't break, and to made a bit of mockery of my presentation in terms of speed, tone, pace, etc. But I think it's really important that hopefully you've got an idea and an overview of what people expect in an interview. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Sushil. That was fantastic. Whilst I'm setting up Naomi's slides, I was going to ask whether you mind just giving a couple of minute overview about your journey to the bar, a bit about your background, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. So we at 25 Bedford Road come from all sorts of different backgrounds. I come from a background, so I went to public school, went to university at Queen Mary in London, and studied law with European law. If we still have the programme, and it's on its last legs now, unfortunately, I did Erasmus when I was at university, and I spent a year in Berlin. It was the best experience in my life. It opened new horizons, and I cannot commend that to you enough if you're still at university or you're about to approach your second year, because it usually takes place in a third year. After that, I applied for scholarships to the United States, and I got a scholarship to go and study in Virginia, where I did my master's, and then came back and worked as a paralegal for a year, and then went and lectured for a year in Germany, criminal law and public international law, did my bar course, and then ended up at 25 Bedford Row. After first time that I applied for pupillage, I did a year of applications. I had 4 interviews and I was unsuccessful in all of them. Didn't get past the first round in any of them. And so that was quite a salutary lesson. And before that, when I applied and there was a scheme where you didn't have to apply through the gateway, I also did some applications, written applications, and didn't even hear back from them. So it's not necessarily plain sailing. That was my route. The way I found myself specialising in criminal defence, I was always passionate about it. I think you have to be, and you have to be maybe a little bit left-leaning to go down the route that we go down. And you're not going to be doing it for the money. You're going to be doing it because you really care about the criminal justice system and doing what's right. So that's essentially in a potted history my background and how I got to 25.
And then you randomly just became a judge somehow?
I decided to apply because I thought it was an area. So I sit in the first tier tribunal. I sit as a mental health judge, and I make determinations as to whether or not people who are sectioned should be discharged from hospital upon review. Normally I do that with a panel of a consultant psychiatrist and a specialist lay member who's a social worker. But during these strange times, I've been doing that alone. So I alone make those determinations now. The reason why I decided to apply was because I had a passion for criminal law as applied to mentally clients with mental health illnesses. And that was something that I found particularly interesting and worthwhile to do. And when the opportunity came up, I thought, this is the first year that I can apply. I was 5 years post pupillage. And I thought, why not? It's not a question of being arrogant. It's a question of thinking, if I am suitable as a candidate, if I'm eligible, then why not try? And if nothing else, even if I don't get the position, it will be an excellent experience for me in terms of honing my abilities and skills if I do apply again in the future. And it just goes to show, as well, as AXA said in the first place, sometimes you're just lucky. And that's how I got there.
I think it's a bit more than luck, but thanks so much, Sushil, for sharing your journey and your brilliant presentation. Really, really appreciate it. There's a few questions for you, but we'll come to them at the end if that's okay. And I'm going to ask Naomi. I think we've finally got her on the line.
I'm hoping you can hear me now. Oh, yay, we did it.
Welcome, Naomi. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry for all the techie issues.
No, it's my fault. So apologies from me. Sorry, I don't know what happened there.
Not at all. Do you want to just give a really quick overview of I did do your intro, but if there's anything else you want to say about your kind of background, your journey to being a solicitor, I'm just going to pull up your slides whilst you do that.
Of course, yeah, no problem. So yeah, sorry again to everyone, because I know obviously I was meant to go first and that would have helped kind of the flow. So apologies for that. But yeah, if I give you a little bit of background about me. So I graduated in 2011. I did a law and business degree at Warwick University, and that was a 4-year course. So it was a qualifying law degree. So I did an extra year because at that time I wasn't sure whether I definitely wanted to go into law. So I was keeping my options open. But by the end of the 3rd year, going into my 4th year, I was kind of clear. Yeah, I knew I wanted to go down the legal route. So I did that. I was applying for training contracts throughout university from my 3rd year, kind of end of 3rd year into 4th year. But I actually didn't get my training contract until 2 years after I had graduated. And I think this is quite a big thing that, students find. They're really worried about not getting a training contract whilst they're in uni. I had a lot of friends who were getting training contracts and some who weren't. But it did take me some time after to get one. So yeah, I eventually got training contract, did my legal practice course, and then went on to start my training contract in 2014. with Freeths, who I'm still with now. And I qualified in 2016 into clinical negligence, which I'm still in now. Really enjoy it. So I'm quite lucky in the sense that, my work's varied. I've got a range of clients, which is nice. And obviously any questions about the area of law that I'm in, I'm happy to take them at the end as well.
Brilliant. Okay, I've just popped your slides up. Hopefully everybody can see them. Thanks so much for that introduction, and hopefully we're good to go now.
Brilliant. So apologies, because I've got the slides in front of me. I was hoping to be on my laptop, but I'm on my phone, but I'll be looking down at my screen now and again. So that's why I'm looking down just in case. So before I go on to the first slide, I think the main thing that I should say is what I'm saying. Obviously, I'm not an expert. These are tips that I've obviously picked up, things that I've noticed on CVs that I've seen that haven't been successful. So these are just tips to help you. There's never really the perfect CV, but yeah, this is just to kind of help you, set it out. I think the biggest mistake people make before they start writing their CV is not understanding the purpose of the CV. And to be honest, I've been there, all of these mistakes I've made. The reason why your CV is so important is because it is technically just to get you to that interview. Lots of people think that the purpose of the CV is to write as much as possible about their experiences, about their work, whether it's legal or non-legal. And that's not the case. It's to show a snippet of your background and obviously interest whoever's reviewing your CV to call you in for an interview or to call you in for the first stage of, the interview process, whatever that looks like. So if you just bring up the first slide for me, Zena.
Yep, I think I'm sharing. Can everyone just double check?
That's fine.
Yeah?
It's not, I can't see it. So as long as it's showing,
first slide's up
fine.
there.
Brilliant. Yeah. So just covering the basics. Obviously, I appreciate that, the range of knowledge in the group who's listening is varied. So I'm not going to dwell on this too much. I'm sure most of this you already know. But, the first one is fairly obvious. Don't include your age. You don't need to, your marital status or a photo. It's obviously illegal for anyone to offer jobs based on those things. So you don't need to include those. And plus it just takes up space which you could be using more efficiently. The next one, be mindful about the email address you use. So of course, I'm sure you all know not to use, silly names in your emails that you put on on your CV. But another thing that I would say to be mindful of and that I've seen actually happen is people using their current job email on their CV. Now, sometimes that's not an issue, but say you're working at a law firm and you're looking to apply for another law firm, that's the last thing you want to be doing. You don't want to be putting your law firm's email address to contact you on for any prospective firm. So maybe that's something to think about in the future, but just always be mindful of the email address that you're using. Again, the next one's fairly obvious. Avoid colloquial language. I think I don't need to go into detail about that. I think you all know what that would entail or include, should I say. And yeah, the next one. So highlighting your skills and achievements, but being mindful to not overstate what you've done or what you've achieved. So I think it is quite difficult because obviously there's a balance to be struck here. You want to stand out because, there's so many applicants, as Sushil was saying earlier, there's thousands of applicants. So you want to stand out. You want to put the best, examples forward. But you must be careful not to over exaggerate what you've done. So if you helped out in a team with a particular project or say even in a non-legal work experience example, you've helped out somewhere and there was a good result at the end of that, then you can include that, that's great, but don't suggest that you did it all by yourself, because the danger there is, someone looking at your CV could call you into an interview and ask you to talk about that in more detail. And of course, if you've overstated what you've done, that will show when you come to speak about it. And that could ultimately be the difference between you getting through to the next round or not. So it's just something to be mindful of when you're including anything in your CV. I've just put at the bottom there, keep your CV to between 1 or 2 pages. When I was at uni, we were told 1 page, don't go over the 1 page. But I think that slowly started to change. And I think the advice that I'm seeing more is that as long as what you're including in your CV is important or relevant enough or interesting enough to include, that's fine, do it. Always be thinking about who's reading your CV and make sure that you tailor it to whoever you're sending your CV out to. So it's not a case of just trying to fill 2 pages with as much information as you can. If you don't think, for example, a certain role has provided you with any skills or given you anything that is something that a potential recruiter would be interested in, then leave it out. That's fine. It may come up later down the line in some other way, during the interview process, but don't feel like you have to put all of your work experience just because you've had that work experience. Try and keep it relevant and pick out the skills that you think a potential recruiter or employer, should I say, would be looking for. The next one, fairly self-explanatory, use a simple font and clearly divided subsections, and make use of bullet points and paragraphs. Again, I think that's fairly straightforward, and I'm sure you all know that. But it just helps the reader. If you can imagine, they're looking at thousands of applications, so it just helps the reader, and everything you can do to help the reader is obviously best. And yeah, the next one, this is quite an important one. Apologies, because I was having obviously technical difficulties, so I don't know if this has already been kind of covered by AXA and Shasil, but I think it's very important to include your LinkedIn. When I was applying, LinkedIn, well, we weren't really told to use your LinkedIn or include it on your CV. But I think now it's becoming such a big part of, applications, and also making people stand out, because a lot of people still don't use their LinkedIn properly, or they don't have a LinkedIn profile. So that's another way of obviously setting yourself apart, from other people. Having said that, it is really important that you look at your LinkedIn profile and you scrutinize it. And you make sure that it is in line with what you're saying in your CV. You don't want your CV to look very different from your LinkedIn. Your LinkedIn is not a Facebook page, so you shouldn't have any photos on there that, you wouldn't want a potential employer to see. And kind of linked to that point, you want to make sure that all of your social media is appropriate and private. If you need to make your Facebook private, anything like that, and just make sure that all of your social media is in line with, how you would want to come across to a potential employer. I think that's very important. I think we often forget that it just takes 2 seconds for a potential employer to go online. They may be impressed by your CV, but if they go online and 2 seconds later they're seeing, inappropriate stuff on your LinkedIn or your Facebook, then that could mean that you're not called in for the next round of interviews. And then just briefly at the bottom there, again, fairly self-explanatory, but your experience and education should always be in reverse chronological order, and always get someone to proofread your CV. Obviously, you're looking at it time and time again, and it's so easy. We all have done it, where you misspell something and you miss it because you've just been reading that document over and over again. And again, that one misspelled word could mean the difference between you being called back or not. So going on to the next slide. So the personal statement. So this can be quite difficult. And again, I've made these mistakes as well. But I think the main thing to remember when you're doing a personal statement at the beginning of your CV is to avoid cliches. It's very easy, and I'm sure you all are, but it's very easy to put things such as, I'm a hardworking individual, I'm a dedicated team member, I achieve great results. Whilst, you know, a lot of you definitely will fall into those categories, those terms, unfortunately, because they are overused, they don't have any weight to them. They don't mean anything on their own. So what you need to always be thinking is, how can I demonstrate to a potential employer that I have the skills that they're looking for? So firstly, keep it short. That's the main thing. You don't want to be writing a personal statement that's taking up half the page. That's not the purpose of it. It's simply to get the interest of whoever's looking at your CV and get them to call you in for an interview. But the next point is tailor it. So what you want to be doing, if you can, really, you should be sending a slightly different CV to different law firms that you're applying to. So the first job, before you even sit down to write that personal statement, would be to go on the website of the firm that you're looking to apply to, and really kind of, I mean, it is difficult because you're only going by what's on their website, but try and get a feel for what the firm is about. So look at their values, look at their vision, and try and pick out something that resonates with you, and use that as your kind of starting point to do your personal statement. So if there's a particular vision that they have, or sorry, a particular value, should I say, that they have, that you feel, yes, that's in line with my values, use that and try and incorporate that within your personal statement. Don't do it, you know, kind of, what's the word, in a way that's obvious that you've simply just gone on their website and taken that value and put it into your personal statement, but weave it into that personal statement so that they will subtly, they'll know this person's gone onto our website. Okay, they've done a bit of research. They haven't simply just sent out this CV, you know, hoping for the best. So that's what I mean by tailor it as much as possible if you can. Avoid cliches. I've already covered that. And yeah, so in terms of structure for your personal statement, again, you're keeping it brief, but you want to get in there a little bit about your knowledge, your skill set, and some experience that you may have. Now, I know, again, there's differing experience in this group, but, you know, if you have had work experience, whether it's legal or not, and if you think there are skills that you've learned from that work experience, try and include at least one sentence on that. Also speak about what you're currently studying, and the fact that you're interested in pursuing a career in law. Try and keep it as open as possible at this stage. Sometimes if you know you're only going to be applying to criminal law firms, niche criminal law firms, that's fine. You can obviously narrow it down and make that absolutely clear in your CV. But if you're not sure at this stage and you're applying to, obviously, you know, commercial law firms that do lots of different areas of practice, then you want to keep it open. Even if you may personally have an interest in, say, criminal law or private client, it's best to keep it as open as possible at this stage, so you just get your foot in the door, essentially. So that's that. So you want to make sure you get your knowledge, skills, and experience in. And just at the bottom there, you'll see on the example I've got, and you can obviously read that in your own time. This is one that a student had kind of sent through to me, and we had spoke about it because her initial one wasn't very good. I must say, this is not one that she had sent off. She hasn't sent this off. This is not her actual CV, but we were talking about how you write personal statements. So this was an example she came up with, which was much better than her last one. But you can see how she's given examples of things that she's done within, you know, university that's made it, give it a bit more weight to what she's saying. So that's the kind of thing you want to, you know, look to do. So obviously you can read through that and get a feel for kind of the structure. And just at the bottom there, there's a key skills section. So that's not mandatory. And obviously you have to feel comfortable with how you set out your CV, but it's just an idea in terms of drawing a reader's attention to key skills that you think you have that set you apart from other people. Now, if you do think that that's something you want to include in your CV, that's great. But what you should try and do also is refer to those skills at some point in your CV, because what you're doing then is you're just backing up, obviously, that key skills section. You don't necessarily have to mention all of those skills in your personal statement. They can come later in your work experience, but as long as you try and incorporate, you know, as many of those as possible, that always helps. But as I said, that's not a mandatory thing. Some people don't want that on there. They want to go straight to the work experience section. But, you know, you can include that if you wish. So the next slide, speaking of work experience, again, this has to be in reverse chronological order. So again, this goes back to my point earlier about the basics. So yeah, you want to highlight your achievements. So think about the type of work experience you've had, whether it's legal or non-legal. If it's non-legal, you want to be thinking about the transferable skills that you have that would help you within the legal environment. So include whatever you think's relevant, and highlight not only your job role, but the impact that you had. So that's very important. It's very easy to simply say, I was front of house, greeting customers when they came in for a meal. What you want to do is expand on that and say, or show whoever's looking at your CV why that was important for the business, or how that impacted on the business. Because what you're doing then is you're showing a prospective employer, oh, hang on, she or he has got a business hat on here. They're thinking, they're not only taking responsibility for their role, but they're understanding the wider impact of what they're doing. So, you know, why is greeting customers and, you know, processing orders quickly and assisting with phone orders, say in a restaurant, important? Because, you know, if you do that well, it shows that you're professional. It obviously gives a good reputation for the business. You know, people are likely to come back. So always be thinking how you can write in a succinct way what you did and why it was important to the business. So again, you'll see there's a little snapshot of another kind of CV example. And I mean, that is very brief. So I would suggest that you would put a little bit more information in there. That's just to give you a guide of how to set it out, really. And you'll see, to be honest, looking at it, the second example is probably one that's a little bit more detailed, and one I would say you would need to follow it, you know, more closely than the first one. So you see how the first one has simply got what this person did, greeting and seating customers, taking table orders and processing phone orders. I would expand on that. But the second one, where we're looking at legal work experience, you've got someone explains what they did, so prepared a chronology, and they've explained why it was important. So to highlight important information relevant to the client's claim. So they've gone that step further in explaining why it was important. They didn't just simply say prepared a chronology. So I hope that makes sense. And obviously any questions about how to set that out and how to kind of expand, I'm happy to take as well. I'm just mindful of the time. And so, yeah, the next slide. So the rest of your CV, again, pretty self-explanatory. Education section must be in reverse chronological order. And yes, the hobby and interest section. I think Sushil touched on this a little bit as well. But hobbies and interests, they must be things that would be an interesting talking point within an interview. So only include that section if you feel it enhances your CV. Don't, you know, include the usual kind of reading or swimming. It has to be things that you feel would make you stand out, or things that you are proud of that are significant achievements that you could potentially talk about at interview. And then in terms of references, I would always advise to put available upon request. But always, if you are invited to do an interview, always make sure you have those details available to you. So before you go to an interview, of course, you'd want to make sure you approach whoever you want to use as your references and make sure they're aware that they are your references, and then make sure you have those details at hand, you know, as you go down the process. But in terms of on your CV, it's not necessary to include their details. And then lastly, the slide about resources. So there are so many out there, and I'm sure, to be honest, a lot of you know more than me, because it was a while since I had to use them. But some of the ones that I have picked out and I found are quite useful. In terms of guidance on CVs, I know YouTube seems a bit of an odd one to kind of recommend, but Standout CV on YouTube is a good source for short videos that give you clear, concise advice about things to include in your CV, and just kind of can steer you in the right direction in terms of, you know, what to include in various sections. So I think that's always a good starting point. But as I would always stress, never rely on one source. It's always good to use different ones in order to create your CV. And then all about law there. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about it, but it's just giving information about training contracts and deadlines, which of course are really important. And there's a lot of information on there about pursuing a legal career in general. I know it can be quite daunting, so that's really helpful as well. Legal cheek, the same. There's a lot of market insight, which again is really important when you're getting to interviews. You want to make sure you have a good working knowledge of kind of what's going on in the market. So that's definitely a good place to look as well. And then Barclays Life Skills. I know you have to sign up to this, and I think it's often overlooked, but it gives a lot of information about various different things, which I think prepare people for the world of work. I know there's a really helpful guide on there about LinkedIn profiles, and how to maximize your LinkedIn profile. So it's definitely worth looking into that and seeing if any of that information is helpful to you. But that's kind of my overview of kind of CVs, and I'll hand back to Zinat.
That's great. Thanks so much, Naomi. A really, really detailed presentation on CVs, and I'm sure lots of that will be beneficial for people on the group. I'm conscious of the time. We've got one presentation left, which is my own. I always leave my own to the end because I know that it's okay if people want to miss that. I'm going to really quickly bring it up. Obviously, if you have to leave, then feel free to leave. Also, any of the panelists, if you need to go, totally understand. I know that I've only reserved your time, so to speak, till now. But if you can stay, then feel free to stay for a little bit, because I know that there are some questions targeted at some of you specifically. I'm going to bring up my presentation, which you're all going to laugh at, because one thing about these things is the way that people do their presentations tell you a lot about the person. I'd say maybe about the lawyer, but perhaps about the person. So yeah, you're going to have a bit of a giggle at this one, because it's I tried to make it a bit colourful because I was feeling a bit grey. So let's see if I can get it to present, and then I will try and whistle through this as fast as I can. If you guys could just confirm that you can actually see it. Yeah, I think so, hopefully. Okay, so I'm going to deal with this as quickly as I can. How to make the paper sift, top tips for application forms. First of all, I just wanted to deal with the actual importance of application forms, and it links into much of what the others have said already. This is your opportunity to demonstrate the best version of you on paper, which is a really difficult task, because obviously when you're not in person, demonstrating who you are as a kind of character, as a person, the best things about you on paper is quite a difficult task. But it is something that you need to keep in mind when you're preparing your application forms. Again, your application will be one of potentially hundreds to thousands. Sadly, that's the reality. Places for training contracts and pupilages, and even mini pupilages, and I'm sure some of vacation schemes are also very, very competitive. So you've got to really find a way to differentiate yourself and also make an impact quite quickly. So things to think about when you're kind of going through your application form and beginning to draft it. How can I impress quickly? And the reason why I say that is because if you are kind of flat at the start of your application form, you're already going to lose the interest of your reader. So you need to ensure that you start strong, carry on strong, and finish strong. Think about how you can distinguish yourself. I say this a lot because the very real reality is that if you are an aspiring lawyer and you're applying for training contracts and pupilages, no doubt you probably have a very good degree, lots of work experience, look great on paper. So you really need to figure out what it is that makes you stand out. Number 3, how can I make my application easy to navigate? We'll talk about that a little bit later on, but by that what I mean is having a good structure. And if anybody wants a good example of structure and signposting, which we'll talk about again, just the way Sushil delivered his presentation and also his slides. And it's a very lawyer thing to do, and something that they kind of try and teach you in bar school and probably the LPC as well. But if you can apply that to your written pieces of work, like your application forms, it will really help. Also, what you need to think about is what are the best examples that you can use from your experience to demonstrate why you're the best person for this job, for this role. Because no doubt all of us have lots of really different experience in different areas of our life. But what you've really got to do is kind of be selective about what you pick and try and pick the ones that really demonstrate why you are the best for that specific role. Different work experience and different life experience kind of serves different purposes, and you need to find a way of figuring out which ones are good for which applications or places or organizations. Lastly, how can I make my experience interesting, relatable, and ensure that it demonstrates the skills and qualities that I need to show? Kind of links into the point before, but it's about not just listing every experience that you've ever had, but how does it actually demonstrate that you've got the skills for that particular job? And it's about making things transferable skills, and making that link directly. Things that I like when I'm looking at application forms and what I am interested in: people that have a rich and varied experience, and they explain it well and they link it directly to the particular job or role. And for me personally, having kind of read lots and lots of pupillage applications, that doesn't just mean mini pupillages or legal work experience. I'm really genuinely interested in other experience in other areas of life, especially when the applicant can make it linked to pupillage or life at the bar or being a barrister. And it's really about understanding the skills and qualities that are needed to be a barrister, and then analysing your life, analysing your experience, analysing the stuff that you've had to do, and making those links. Next point, kind of linking into a couple of points already made, but personally, I'm interested in somebody that's got a bit of an interesting story, somebody with a bit of personality. And I would say that in a kind of tasteful, tactful way, find a way of including hobbies and interests, and really just what makes you you, because a piece of paper is really just that, unless you can find a way of really trying to humanize it and humanizing your story on paper so that the reader can kind of really relate to what you are and what you're about. I also like people that can make their points concisely, which is hilarious because I am often not very concise. But in an application, it's good because as a reader, if you've got a million to get through, you want to just be able to get the key points and somebody that can structure them well. I'm also interested in somebody who is more than just strong academics and lots of work experience. And I say that because I often get asked about, you know, how many mini pupillages do I need? Do I need a first-class degree? And all of that. But, you know, yes, academics are important. Yes, work experience in legal firms and chambers is important. But there are lots of other things that are important too. And it's really about how you transplant that onto paper and in interview to show other people why your other experiences are equally as valuable, whether that's pro bono, voluntary work, you do music, you, I don't know, work at a food bank, you have a part-time job, you've paid for your study, you've worked whilst, you know, studying. All of those things can be really valuable ways of showing why you're suited for these types of careers. They show resilience, they show variety, they show persistence. So it's just about thinking about, okay, what do you do? And then how you can make that link to whatever career it is you're applying for. If there are essay questions, personally, I like somebody that's brave enough to take an interesting take. Interesting, but not stupid. There is a distinction. Somebody who's bothered to research the topic, and somebody who's able to formulate their arguments well. That might include, for example, showing that they understand both sides of the argument, but obviously coming down on the side that they believe. What I don't like, I'm not really bothered about the fact that you've done a million mini pupilages or a million work experience placements. And trust me, I've seen applications where literally somebody's had like 10 to 15 mini pupilages. It really doesn't tell me anything about you other than actually you've just been desperate to get lots and lots of work experience, but it's not been in a very focused way. So if you do have work experience, then yes, put it down, but you also need to be able to tell the reader what it is that you've learned, how it relates to the job that you're applying for, and why it was important for you. The fact that you've just done them isn't impressive in and of itself. Again, hilariously, because I do this a lot, but try not to waffle in your applications. To keep your points tight, strongest points first. We'll come on to that in just a sec. And also just pick your best points. You don't have to take every point. If there's a point, if you've got like 6 things to say potentially, but 4 of those are really good, then just include your 4 points. Again, what I'm not interested in is just academics and standard work experience without not really knowing much more about who you are. Again, poorly structured responses that are difficult to follow. It can be really easy to get into this kind of habit of doing paragraphs upon paragraphs, where actually within 3 paragraphs is only really 2 bullet points. So really think about, okay, what am I trying to say? What are my top 3 points here? And how can I say them in a really clear way? Also, don't want to see responses that are really obviously not tailored to my organisation. So I've had examples where in our chambers, we are an exclusively criminal defence set. I've read applications where they're talking about prosecution work. So clearly it's somebody that's just done a copy and paste job. That will automatically render your application in the kind of no pile. So just be aware of that. And again, essay responses that have not been carefully thought out and researched, it's very obvious when you've not spent time on those. So do give that some thought. And lastly, some top tips. Sorry, there's lots of stuff on this slide because I didn't want to kind of add another slide, but here we go. Research the place that you're applying to. And again, I've given that same example. Don't say you want to do prosecution and apply to a defence chambers. Don't use the wrong name of chambers or the wrong firm. Don't do a copy and paste job. And trust me, it does happen. Second point, I took this from GCSE English. I'm not sure if anybody remembers this, but it's the PEE acronym, which is Point, Evidence, Explain, a bit like Sushil's STAR, except his was better. But what I mean by this is when I gave the example of not just saying I've done a mini pupillage, you've actually got to make the point and then provide evidence about what it is that experience has given you, and explain a little bit about it. So not just I did a mini pupillage at a family law set and it was great, but you know, what did you learn? What did you see? How has it influenced your decision to pursue this job? Really think about what value those experiences have given you. Before you even draft your application, one thing I would suggest is brainstorm on a separate piece of paper all of the examples that you want to draw on from your experience, whether it's academia, whether it's paid work, whether it's legal work experience, voluntary work, bullet point it all down on a piece of paper, and then plan which of those examples you want to use to which of the questions in the application form. Because what that will do is that will ensure that you're not using the same examples over and over again in different questions. And it will also mean that you'll get to showcase lots of different examples from all of your experiences, hopefully in a really compelling and persuasive way. A general rule kind of about advocacy generally, both written and oral, is to always start with your strongest point, your strongest argument. So if you've got, like, as I said, 3 killer points or 3 killer examples and 2 less good ones, that's not a very good phrase, but you know what I mean, then, you know, start with your strongest ones. Consider whether you even need to include the other ones. And again, don't be afraid to leave things out if they don't add value. Think outside the box. I've already said this. Think about all the things that you do outside of being a law student, outside of being an aspiring lawyer. What are the things that make you you, and what are the things that allow you to develop qualities and values that are relevant to being a lawyer. Think about your character building, skills building, all of those things and how they are transferable to a career in law. In terms of structure, I've already mentioned using a signposting structure. Do not use this example, my presentation, as a signposting example, because it isn't. But Sushil's example really is. What it basically means is, if you say you're going to deal with something, really breaking down what points you're going to deal with it in. So, you know, I really want to be a barrister for 3 key reasons. Firstly, blah. Secondly, thirdly, and just really imagine you're kind of mapping out your application. Imagine you're taking your reader on a journey and you're really having to point out the map of that journey. Even the way Sushil did his bullet points, you should be able to see what I mean in terms of structure. So you can tell he's a proper judge because he even does it in his PowerPoints. And the last 2 points, demonstrate passion. I'm really big on that, mainly because I think it's something that can make a flat application not flat and really, again, humanizes things. And again, really basic, proofread it yourself, but also get somebody else to read it, because once you've looked at a document for too long, you can just stop seeing mistakes. And that's happened to me before. So that was a really quick whistle stop tour through my slides. I'm hoping that that was helpful. I'm sorry that I spoke super fast, but I was trying not to keep everybody for too long. What I'm going to do really quickly, again, if anybody needs to leave, feel free to leave. I'm going to select some of the questions. We're not going to be able to do them all. And then depending on who I've still got on the line in terms of Aksa, Naomi and Sushil, I'll ask if you wouldn't mind dealing with them. So I'm just scrolling right back to the top. There's one about personal profile, but I think it's already been dealt with, so I'm not going to ask that. Somebody's asked, what would be an example of a standout experience? How do you decide what your standout experience would be on your application? Aksa, do you have anything on that? Oh, can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, I made a quick note of the questions that were directed to me. So that was one of them. So, of course, as Zena also said, you've got to have the strong academics and the work experience, like to get your foot in the door. Like that's the bare minimum. And besides that, it's what makes you stand out. I think, if I think back, mine was probably the experience I had prior to coming to the bar. And also the sports that I'm very committed to. So I'm, you know, I train quite frequently in the sports that I do, and really enjoy it. And that was something that the panels were generally quite interested in. And on top of that, they were always quite interested in the various travel research projects that I'd done. And also in a couple of my applications, they wrote, there were certain questions which led me to answer with things like, you know, what's one of the proudest achievements that you've had? And I wrote something like getting Employee of the Month when I was 16 and worked in Iceland. And, you know, that was something that the panel asked about. And it was just such, and I really elaborated on it and wrote about like why it made me so proud and like, you know, made me want to carry myself professionally throughout everything else I did, at least for during those formative years. But just taking those little things that make you have been really formative in your experience, whether that is commitment to sport, commitment to an arts. Somebody asked a question about whether theatre is relevant. Advocacy, that's also something that makes you unique. So, you know, touching on that question, definitely put it in. Don't just rely on mooting as the only advocacy experience that you can get during law school. I hope that answers your question.
Brill, thanks, Aksa. I'm not going to be able to do them all, so I'm going to do the ones that I think that we haven't covered too much. James asks, when you were asked to upload a cover letter as part of an online application, and they give you guidance as to what they want you to include, do you also include any of the other information you went through? I would include only what they've asked you to include if they've been that prescriptive, to be honest. And if there's anything that you think is particularly important that you want to add, find a way of weaving it in or making it relevant to one of their subheadings. Ross, Theatre, we've already dealt with that. Definitely really valuable. Everybody loves it. Include it. You know, it's not just about mooting. Trust me. Any way you can get public speaking, presentation experience. I find it really interesting hearing about something that isn't mooting personally. Can someone explain what pupillage is? We've done that, I hope. Brill. Phoebe, representations. When you've been asked to prepare a presentation on absolutely anything, what are your thoughts on choosing a legal topic? Sushil, do you want to take this one? Because our second round interviews kind of relate to this. If Sushil's still here. Yep, he is.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, hopefully that's working now.
Yeah.
My advice would be do anything apart from a legal topic. The reason I say that is, as a panel, you will have heard hundreds and hundreds of people going through the interview process. You will have been talking about law all day over several days. And quite frankly, the panel will be bored of it. Number two, if you do a legal topic, it's very unlikely, unless you have specialist experience, that you will know more than the panel. So it's an opportunity for you to slip up on a banana skin that you've laid for yourself. And number three, the best presentations are always the ones that people are most passionate and interested about. I remember someone did in recent years a presentation on a musical instrument, brought it with them, played it. It was absolutely brilliant, really well done, really engaging. And I remember for my presentation, I did it on a famous Soviet fighter ace called Alexei Marasyev. And his story, very, very briefly, was he was shot down in 1942. He was shot down 20 miles behind German lines. He broke both of his legs. He spent 18 days crawling with 2 broken legs back to his own side, to the Soviet lines. He fought off Germans, a bear, and starvation, to have both of his legs chopped off because they had gangrene. He had sepsis. He had 2 prosthetic legs. Within a year, he was flying again and became a high-scoring fighter ace. And I use that as an example of perseverance and endurance. So do whatever you feel passionate about, whatever you're interested in, but don't do a legal topic.
I think I totally agree with that, Sushil. Also, did everybody just see how he signposted in his response? He does it without even realizing. Yeah, I did my topic on Youth Inspire, which is one of the youth projects that I run. And I think, to be honest, that's probably what got me pupillage at 25. If I had spoken about anything law, I wouldn't have had any chance at all. So don't bother doing law. Do something you love and that you're passionate about. Sushil, these questions are for you, so I'm just going to roll them out. Hafsa, when you say the professional voice we use eventually becomes a second skin, how can applicants work on developing this and ensuring they avoid verbiage, deliver their point most powerfully?
There's a number of things that you can do. First of all, if you're at university, your bar society or your careers organisation should have mock interview practice that they'll be able to give to you. I'm part of Inner Temple. They do mock interviews on a regular basis every year to give you experience. If you can't get into that, if you have anyone that you know, friends, family, who is willing to give you a mock interview. It doesn't have to be about the law. It can just be about show me a time or demonstrate to me a time that you suffered adversity or hardship and how you got around it. All of those experiences are ones in which you can practice speaking, as I said, slowly, clearly, and thoughtfully. But the key thing to improving upon that is record yourself each and every time. Use your phone, set it up, record yourself in the interview process. And then those opportunities, each time you take them, and you, as I said, you don't have to have contacts. It can be with absolutely anyone going through set questions. Each time you present, you will get better.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Sush. Also, as a result of your presentation, which other competencies could be discussed in an interview?
I saw that the list is very much open-ended. My immediate go-to thoughts were judgment, working under pressure, working in a team, overcoming failure, making a difficult decision, learning from mistakes. They're all quite generic, but essentially, it will be a question where the answer won't be particularly easy to give, such as learning from a mistake, because you have to admit to weaknesses, but then show a route around it. So those main areas, but I can't think of any others off the top of my head.
I think that's quite a good selection. Thank you. How do you improve your performance in pupillage interviews when certain sets don't provide feedback? I think, Sush, I probably say, kind of linked to what you've already said, making the most of mock interviews, people that are offering that, so schemes with the ins, other mentoring schemes like that. I don't know if you or AXA have anything else to add in relation to that.
No, nothing from my end.
One thing I did after every interview was write down all the questions that I was asked, and as well as my impressions from the interview, and shared that with my fellow pupillage seekers. And so we were always exchanging questions and sort of bullet pointing the sorts of responses and giving each other feedback on that. And I know a lot of us that did end up getting pupillage, we look back and found that exercise very useful. So not all chambers do offer feedback, but you can create a system for yourself. That's the way we did it in my year, at least.
That's great. Thanks, AXA. Do you find applicants who have taken the GDL or equivalent at a disadvantage? I think the answer to that is no, quite simply. Does everybody agree? Yeah. I think a lot of people actually quite like it because it shows that you've got some other interests, you've got something else to talk about, but you're definitely not at a disadvantage, so I wouldn't worry about that. My questions seem to have disappeared. Okay, here they're back again. I've skipped a couple. There's one for Naomi. What advice do you have for a student going into their first year of undergraduate study looking to become a solicitor? What helped you decide which area you wanted to qualify in?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think the main advice I would say going into your first year, don't worry too much about necessarily getting work experience in your first year. I think the first year, for me personally, I would say it was more about getting to grips with the amount of studying. And, I don't think I'm breaking anything to you, that there is a lot of contact hours. And so I think it's important for you to get your head around that and just kind of get a feel for the areas of law that you're interested in. I know that theory is very different to practice, but it definitely helps in trying to understand, okay, where are my interests? Do I prefer kind of commercial law? Or do I prefer kind of private client law? Obviously, that may change as you go through university, and that's fine. But it's just kind of having those questions in the back of your mind. And then obviously, once you start, moving towards your second year, that's when you need to start thinking seriously about reaching out and getting work experience in a variety of areas. I would even say, even if you think in your mind, I don't like real estate, still apply to firms who may offer, some work experience in real estate, because you never know. As I said, I think theory is very different to practice, and it may be that you may change your mind when you've actually done it in practice. Don't be shy to reach out to potential or for potential opportunities via LinkedIn. So if you come across a profile of a solicitor who works at a firm that you're potentially interested in, obviously be professional, but don't be shy and send a message via LinkedIn and just explain, you're interested in a certain area. Would there be a possibility of you doing a placement, even if it's a day? A day is better than no experience at all. So that's always an option. I would say another thing is law fairs. They are your best friend. I think it's very easy to not go to them, or when you go, to simply, go around the stalls very quickly and pick up some goodies and freebies and then just leave. And actually, that's the chance that you get. It's essentially, it could be kind of like a mini interview. So when you get that chance, that could also be helpful in you speaking to different firms, seeing what kind of work they do, and getting an insight into the areas. So that's the kind of advice I would say going into uni. That will help you in the long run. In terms of helping you decide what you want to qualify in, again, I think that comes with time. But as I said, you know, if you can get experience in different areas, that will also help you. And also just to think about why you wanted to study law in the first place. Hopefully there's something that kind of triggered in your mind, you know, the want to study law. And so if you can potentially trace it back, that could potentially give you clues as well. So yeah, that would be kind of my main points.
Great, thanks so much, Naomi. Right, I am going to call this session to an end now. We're half an hour over time, and I'm really thankful to the panelists for giving up so much of their time for this session. I hope everybody's found it useful. If anybody's had questions that haven't been answered, then please join the LinkedIn group and put them in there, and I will endeavour to answer them, and no doubt any of the other practitioners that are on there, if they get a few minutes, I'm sure they'll be happy to respond. Thank you again. I'll send details about next week's session, about the recording, and also a feedback form, and I'd be really grateful if you guys can fill that in. But thanks so much. Thank you, Naomi, Sushil and Aksa, for your help and all of your expertise and experience.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dina. Can I just say, on behalf of all of us who gave presentations, I'm sure I'm not speaking out of turn, on behalf of everyone else who's still left here, we're incredibly grateful for you organising this, and it's incredibly useful and important, particularly at a time like this. So thank you so much. It's not easy. You do it so brilliantly.
Thanks so much,
Absolutely.
Sushil.
Thank you, Zena.
Sweet. Thank you, guys. Speak to you all soon. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Bye. Bye.